All right. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Mortgage Talk Monday. We've got Uriah with us today, and our topic with Uriah today is contract for deeds. Uriah, introduce yourself to everyone, and let's get started.
Well, thanks, Doug. Like you said, my name is Uriah Hogue. I'm the owner of, well, one of the owners of Edgewater Title. Been doing title business now for about 20 years, give or take. So it's been a very interesting up and down world over those 20 years, but it's also been a really fun career to have because there's nothing like real estate.
You know, how is Uriah? We're talking about contract base. How is a contract for deed different from your traditional finance sale, like you do on your norm? I mean, this is not the normal, but this is something that we're seeing come around again. How is it different?
Yeah, contract for deeds, they actually they predated me getting into the business. They used to be very big back in the late 70s, early 80s when the interest rates were rising up, very similar to, obviously what they're doing now. It's an interesting way for buyer and seller to get into a property and get out of that property. Also allows for the sellers to have an opportunity to, help somebody maybe get off, get a good start on a property and maybe make a little money in the spread between the two. So it's an interesting product. That's what I'll say. And
Nice.
it's nice to see them coming back around.
So can I work on the property and improve it while I'm in the contract for deed?
So every contract for deed is going to be a unique situation, right? It's always going to depend on how that particular contract is written. I've seen it where the buyer, has to have written permission from the contract holder in order to do any work. I've also seen it in situations where they've allowed a little more of a little more leeway, up to certain dollar amounts, that kind of stuff, as far as doing improvements to the product. The part I always like to make sure of is, per the contract, that's kind of how it's all laid out. And it's always important, in my opinion, to let the buyer know that if they are doing improvements, they are technically still not the full owner of the property until they pay off that contract. So whatever improvements they're doing, I think it's good to have that general idea coming into it that way.
That's interesting. And for anybody who's ever had an insurance claim after a hailstorm and tried to put on a new roof, we know that all lenders have a little bit of that because you have to get the lender to sign off on that insurance check before they pay the contractor doing the roof. It's not a lot different, other than, like Uriah said, earlier, that it's the seller of that property who's the bank now and giving the okay for those type of things. Uriah, as long as you make the terms inside the contract, is it a safe form of ownership for a buyer to use to get into the new home?
Yeah, I think it's a very safe form. In fact, we've helped over the years where people have they want to do a contract for deed for themselves, and they'll come to us and say, can you help us write up the contract? We ask for terms and conditions, and I think it's usually when it's an individual buyer and seller doing it, they'll give us kind of a boilerplate of what they believe a contract should look like. It always makes me a little more nervous doing it that way, though, because then they don't have an individual who's kind of well versed in what a contract for deed scenario, needs to. Anytime you enter into a legal and binding contract, I feel like all terms possible should be called out ahead of time. The reason being is because you don't want to get halfway through a transaction and realize that you don't have something clearly defined, or even worse, that you had something clearly defined in your mind that the other person does not have the same definition of. So for me, it's always about, the individuals doing the contract and who's helping them in that process, because it can be a complicated thing to put together, for sure.
Nice. Now, my understanding is you can't make any liens against the property or borrow money against the property while underneath that contract. But during the contract process or the time frame, who receives the payments, and can I pay it off with no penalty early? Is there any prepayment penalties at all associated to it?
Well, again, Doug, it's always that scenario of who's writing up the contract, right? I've seen contract for deeds with prepayments scenarios written into them. The individual wanted to make sure that they were able to get the money they expected for the entire time that they expected it for.
Okay.
Typically, what we're seeing as far as the payments, it goes from the person who is purchasing, i.e. what I would call the buyer, to back to the seller, depending on whether or not there is a mortgage against the property that's existing, that kind of stuff. I've seen it in situations where the seller didn't want to actually receive the payment. They would prefer just go straight to the lender, which in my opinion is a little bit more risky. But again, every contract is going to have its own comfort level and scenarios behind it.
Very nice.
Love it. And I know that a bunch of us have started working with our buyers to do contract for deeds, and there's a lot into it. And really, one of the keys to the team is to have a title company who knows how to get this done. Uriah, do you want to leave your contact information for people who might want to reach out to you about this, or just a general closing?
Yeah, actually, what I'll do is I'll just send you guys a link to my stuff at the end of this. That way you can come check out our website, get familiar with who we are as a title company. Edgewater Title's been in business now for about 7 years. Like I said, I've been in this game for about 20 of them. So, but if anybody needs to get a hold of me at any time, my cell phone is always my best source of contact, which is 612-741-7150. Comes directly to me, and that's my voicemail as well. So, but yeah, no, I mean, if anybody has any questions, I mean, I would recommend them reaching out to you guys first. And, from there, I would love to be a resource as well.
And we have a lot of realtors who watch this. So if they want to get a hold of you directly, feel free to reach out directly to Uriah. Contract for deeds are coming, and it's a great option for certain people in the community.
Absolutely.
Sounds great. Thank you, sir. Have a good
Thanks,
Uriah.
gentlemen. Take care.
All right.